Hello everyone, welcome back to Rewired with your host Khadija Farosh. For those of you just joining us, this podcast is all about differentiating between fact and fiction through exploring our teenage minds and psychology. Now I don't want to spoil the rest of the episode, so I want you all to sit back, relax, and enjoy. A lot of teens nowadays require constant stimulation. We always have something going on in the background, and this is due to a variety of reasons I could get into, but today's episode has more of a specific focus. Now, to play it out, do you know that moment, that portion of time when you decide you actually need to sleep? When you're lying in bed and the lights are off and everything is quiet except for your brain? You might be replaying that one conversation from 5 hours ago, or you're rewriting the text you might have already sent, or reimagining 10 different versions of what someone might think of you. And you tell yourself, well, I'm just overthinking. And this tends to be why a lot of us require that stimulation, that constant run of a TV show or a song or a movie or a social media platform in the background. It's a form of escapism over addressing, which is why today we're breaking down the psychology of overthinking. Why it happens, what it does to your brain, and how to break the loop in a healthy way. Overthinking, or rumination, is when your thoughts essentially keep circling around the same worries, questions, regrets, etc., but you never actually productively solve anything. Psychologists describe it as a kind of mental chewing, so you keep going over the same thing again and again, hoping that this time you'll somehow make sense of it. But the truth is, the brain doesn't necessarily work that way. So when you're overthinking, you're not analyzing, but you're looping. And research shows that rumination activates the default mode network, which is the part of your brain that tends to light up when you're not focused on the outside world or external stimuli, but more on the internal world or yourself. And this might mean your memories, your mistakes, your future. It's basically the network responsible for self-reflection. But the problem is when anxiety enters the picture, that self-reflection tends to turn into self-criticism. And the weird part about this is that your brain actually thinks it's helping you. It's trying to protect you from making another mistake, from being rejected, or from missing a warning sign in the future. And the overthinking is your mind's way of basically saying, well, if I can understand every single possible angle, then maybe I can stay safer in future situations. But the brain's threat system, which is the amygdala, doesn't know the difference between danger and discomfort, so it reacts to social anxiety or uncertainty the same way it would to an actual dangerous threat. So you get stuck in a loop with this, you feel anxious, your brain tries to fix it by overthinking, the overthinking increases anxiety, and the cycle keeps spinning. For teenagers and young adults, overthinking is especially common because the prefrontal cortex, or the part of the brain that helps regulate emotions and plan ahead, is still developing, and it only fully forms at around age 25. Meanwhile, your emotional centers are incredibly highly active, and the result of this is that feelings have more impactful effects and rational control takes longer to kick in. And another big factor is what psychologists call cognitive mechanisms, so the patterns that our brain falls into that keep these thoughts looping. An example of this is catastrophizing, and for those who don't know, that's essentially imagining the absolute worst case scenario, even if it's incredibly unlikely to take place. So for example, you said one thing wrong and now you believe everybody hates you. Another example could be personalization, which is taking things personally even when they might have nothing to do with you. So for example, you might see somebody give you a glance, and you might misinterpret it as a negative glance or one that has negative connotations towards you directly, but in reality that person might have just been reacting to an internal thought that they had and happened to be looking in your direction. Another one is attentional bias, which is the tendency to focus more on threats or negative information rather than neutral or positive information. And so basically your brain zeroes in or zooms in on the stuff that might be dangerous to your social life or reputation rather than the stuff that might have positive impacts. So all of these mechanisms make negative thoughts stick. They make them feel more urgent, even when they aren't actually predictive or helpful in future scenarios or situations. They won't really protect you, they won't really keep you away from danger or harm. It's kind of just your brain misinterpreting different pieces of information and encouraging you to think about them in an attempt to protect you in situations in the future, despite the fact that that really isn't the case. And this shows that overthinking is more than an individual habit, and that it can actually be a brain pattern that's reinforced by both your own personal emotions and your brain and internal cognition, especially for teenagers, people our age, and a little bit older. Now, what is the impact of rumination? How does it affect us beyond the actual thinking time that we are using up or wasting? Studies have shown that people who ruminate often have stronger connections between brain areas responsible for memory and emotion. And this means that your brain becomes better at remembering distressing moments and linking them to similar feelings later on. So it's essentially a kind of emotional conditioning. And that's why overthinkers tend to feel more mentally exhausted even after doing nothing. Your brain is spending real energy replaying events, generating alternate realities, and scanning for threat patterns that don't exist. It also participates in a lot of physiological and other psychological consequences, and the main one that we probably all can recognize is sleep loss. So essentially, you're mentally on when you're supposed to be resting, and your body is exhausted, but your brain continues to think and reinforce stress. And this contributes to sleep loss by triggering the body's stress response, keeping the mind in a state of alert that makes it difficult to fall asleep. This can create a negative cycle where being unable to fall asleep causes more anxiety about the lack of sleep, further increasing stress and preventing rest. So without the distractions of the day, worries can feel more intense and overwhelming at night, which is also why we tend to have more positive thoughts during the day and more negative thoughts during the night, which is also why we probably shouldn't be staying up very late. Another factor it contributes to is indecision. So essentially you're afraid of making the wrong choice, so you make none. And overthinking contributes to this indecision by creating an excessive cycle of worry and analysis paralysis, which is basically when you overanalyze a situation to the point where you can't make a decision because you've looked at all the factors and obsessively focused on them. And this is where the fear of making the wrong choice becomes so overwhelming that it leads to complete inaction. So by obsessively focusing on every single potential outcome and dwelling on past mistakes you made, overthinkers tend to become stuck and unable to move forward with solid decisions. Finally, social anxiety and relationship distress tend to be other factors that are incredibly affected when you live as an overthinker. So you tend to start believing that your thoughts are fact. So you're thinking, oh, they must think I'm weird. Oh, I probably said the wrong thing at the wrong time. And overanalyzing these social interactions can lead to a lot of negative self-evaluations. And this then fuels further anxiety and avoidance of future situations so that you don't have to deal with that social stress. Now, over time, that can create a feedback loop between overthinking and low mood, which is why a lot of cognitive researchers have linked rumination to a higher risk of depression and generalized anxiety. Now, to avoid these harms, let's look at some strategies that prioritize giving your brain a way to process information without getting stuck in this loop. So, my first piece of advice is to notice and label it. So, instead of getting swallowed by your thoughts, try mentally saying, okay, this is a looping thought about XYZ. It doesn't make the thought disappear, but it helps you step back and see it for what it actually is. And cognitive psychologists call this cognitive diffusion, which is a skill often used in acceptance and commitment therapy that teaches individuals to create a distance from their thoughts and see them as just thoughts rather than literal facts or commands that should control their lives. The second one is to give yourself small tasks. So switching from thinking to doing something concrete like making a snack or organizing your desk or stretching, working out, helps reset your attention. You're not avoiding the thought, really, you're kind of just giving your brain different data to work with. So use physical activity or enjoyable hobbies and challenge your thoughts by questioning their validity and shifting to a more balanced perspective by doing something else. This will give you more of a reality check so that when you do refer back to these thoughts, you think, maybe I might have been overreacting, overanalyzing, overthinking. My third piece of advice is to use a short worry window. So set 10 to 15 minutes in the day aside to think through these concerns, write them down, and then move on. Research shows that setting a time limit actually reduces the urgency of the thoughts outside that window, and that writing them down helps you fully realize them, fully address them, and understand the magnitude of the impact that it's having on your life. Fourth and finally, check the facts. So when a thought keeps looping, I want you to ask yourself, is this based on evidence or is it just a projection of the worst case scenario? This is a simple cognitive behavioral approach that's used a lot in CBT that helps separate assumptions from reality. So we've learned that overthinking and rumination are both habits and cognitive behaviors. Everybody does them at some point, especially when you're worried or uncertain, and especially at our age. The main takeaway is that it is possible to notice these patterns and to make small adjustments. You don't need to completely fix your brain, if that's a thing, and you don't need to silence every thought. It's more about finding ways to interact with your thoughts so that they don't take over your attention and later your life. And the more you practice, the easier it becomes to recognize when your brain is spinning in circles and to shift your focus without forcing. Alright, that's a wrap for today's episode. If you want to keep the conversation going, you can find me on Instagram and YouTube at OfficialRewired. My email is khadija.farrash@gmail.com if you'd like to contact me there. That's khadija.farrash@gmail.com. Or if you're feeling extra chatty, join our community Discord where you can hang out and discuss this and upcoming episodes, have access to early snippets and announcements, and a couple more special perks. You can find all the links to my socials in the show notes below and in the Linktree in my description. Don't forget to drop a comment, question, feedback, or anything you'd like to let me know of down below if you're feeling extra generous. And if you really enjoyed, a 5-star rating on Spotify or a like and subscribe on YouTube would mean the world. I can't wait to chat with you again soon and see you in the next episode.